Hey, welcome everybody. This is the first edition of the I Don't Know What I'm Doing with guest with Esteban Kolsky. Last time it was like, I don't know, I'm going to try a special edition, but no, now I got a name. The name is I Don't Know What I'm Doing with guest. So my name is Esteban Kolsky. I'm the Chief Evangelist for SAP for customer experience. And my job is to have conversations. And in that manner, I want to let my guest introduce herself so I won't destroy her reputation. So, guest, could you please introduce yourself?
All right. Well, I'm just going to say that this is not comedians, not in cars, not getting coffee. So anything, anything that comes out of this has got to be better now that we've set the expectation low. So I'm
Yeah.
Nicole France. I'm Vice President and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, where I focus on customer experience as an enterprise-wide team sport. How's that?
Yeah, it's just so much better than what I do.
It's too
So,
much of a meeting, but it sounds catchy.
yeah. So, in the realm of not knowing what I'm doing, the reason we're having this conversation is because Nicole is one of the few people in this world that I respect more than myself. So that's a pretty significant, compliment. But Nicole is an incredibly smart person who has been thinking about the concept of relationships and communications and privacy and all the stuff that I've been talking about recently. So I wanted to have a conversation with her about a specific article. I put this article 2 weeks ago in my newsletter. Let me understand the concept of sharing screens. And let's try to share this. Where is it? Somewhere in here is goodness gracious. The link to the article, by the way, will be in the newsletter, so you can read it from the newsletter. And this article is not showing up in my screen, so I guess I'm not going to share it.
Happy to
But
share.
anyways, it's a this row that I have. Oh, here it is. Sorry. Let me share it. So, what you have in your screen right now is the article, which is from Thunderhead. The article has a lot of stuff talking about real-time interaction management and why is everyone talking about it. I made reference to it in my last two newsletters. And within that article, if I can stop sharing this, there's actually a chart, which is what I would like to talk about today more than anything. And the chart I know I can share because it's right here. So this chart that you see, basically it talks about inbound versus outbound conversations and the different aspects of it and the different portions of that. This is what I would like to talk about with you, Nicole L. France. So
El Nicole,
that
see.
was I know. I don't know why Brand keeps saying Nicole L, but it just irks me like nails on a chalkboard level. Okay, so Nicole, my good friend, my kumpa, my person like that I trust. Um, we don't know each other. We never seen each other. You're a member of the audience that I picked at random, right? So let's talk about outside in and inside out and inbound and outbound, please, and communications.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm glad there are no magic tricks involved in this either. So just putting that out there. Yeah, I find it really interesting. So I thought this article had some really good points. I thought it was well put together, but it prompted for me some important questions. So I just want to point out that I don't think that inside out and outside in are the same as inbound and outbound. Um, so for me, I know shocking, right? And far be it from me to parse out definitions, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. So what I thought was useful about this particular chart is that it really is suggesting the timeline or the event horizon, if you will, that's pushing things to happen. And the idea that businesses have a timeline that they would like things to happen on, and customers have their own timelines on which they would like things to happen or not happen, depending on the scenario. So I thought it was useful to make this distinction. Now, what's interesting to me about this is that's not the same as inbound and outbound communications. And it's probably worth getting into a little bit of the distinctions there because, really what we're talking about is what is the precipitating event and who's initiating the contact and who's actually configuring the next response, as it were.
So let's pretend that you and I are analysts, okay? Because that's what analysts do, the slice and dice definition. So let's pretend that you and I are analysts, right? I like your concept of different timelines. And I think that one of the biggest problems we have in customer experience today is the role of customer experience is finding a way to mesh these timelines in a way that creates value for both the company and the customer. And
Yep.
that's what we failed to do. So let's explore that a little bit more. I mean, what about who I hate to use the word who's in charge, who owns, who's in control, but like how do you decide? What's the prioritization process for these timelines? If the company wants something to happen and the customer wants something to happen, and how do you actually prioritize that?
Well, it's very clear. I mean, ultimately, the customer decides what they're going to do when. Am I going to buy something today? Am I going to put it off till tomorrow? Am I going to start figuring out what my needs are? Am I going to organize my thinking around that? How long am I going to take to do that? Am I going to let you know that I've got a problem? Um, am I going to let you know how quickly I would like that problem to be resolved and how? I mean, it's ultimately down to the customer. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that businesses can do to prompt customers. I mean, okay, let me just take this as an example, Esteban. When we were organizing this conversation, you talked to me and asked if I would do it. I said yes. And then you sent me a note about scheduling a time, but you had to remind me, right? You had to send me a prompt to actually let you know which time slot was good for me. It's not that I didn't want to do it. It's not that I didn't intend to do it. It's not that I changed my mind. I just got busy and distracted with other stuff. So I think there's an important distinction to be made between understanding that the customer is ultimately in charge of what they do, but that we as businesses do have some latitude to make some nudges, to present some reminders, to initiate some conversations or some communications that can be very welcome to the customer. But it's a question of defining where that boundary line is, and particularly where the right boundary is in the right context.
I'm doing a lot of work with my therapist and waiting for people to finish talking when I have something to say and I know where you're going. But actually, this is what I love about what you just said, because when you were talking, my brain was saying, yes, there is a value to the outbound communication. So let's not splice words, right? There's a value to outbound from the company emanating something to the customer, and that is if you understand the value that the customer is seeking in this, right? Then you can prompt and force and cajole and pick your own word the customer to actually move into more of your timeline. You're still not going to change the way things happen, but you're actually becoming a participant in a two-way value creation. Because look, this works for me. I have somebody that is smart in my podcast of what is it called? What do they call it? I don't know what I do with guests, right? So I have you, which is smart. We have a good conversation. People will listen to this, think that I know what I'm doing. They listen to me. They think you know more what you're doing. But there's value to me in that. There's value to you in actually expressing these ideas and fleshing your ideas. Contrary to what people believe, the biggest job of the analyst is actually be wrong so they can be eventually be right, right? So this
Exactly.
conversation gets us to that place. So there's value to both of us in here, keeping with the same thing. But even when you move that to company and customer, there's value to both. But it's just the one coercing the other or prompting the other one to move forward. That's what I think is the meshing between inbound and outbound, right?
I think so. And the reason I think this distinction is important is because I think when we talk about things on the customer service side in particular, to some extent on the sales side, and aspects of marketing, what I think we've gotten better and better at doing through the right tools, among other things, but also the right mindset, is recognizing that it is customers that are making decisions, that are setting the timeline, that are deciding what they're going to do. And we might be giving them prompts, we might be offering them options, but ultimately customers are doing it. Now, the problem that I see is that there's still all this stuff that is really outbound, that is, I think, characterized in this chart as inside out, that is still very much done on the business's timeline with often not enough regard for what the hell the customer actually cares about, what is a priority and what is valuable to them. So I'm going to use the basic example of marketing emails. I mean, my personal inbox is cluttered with them. And I admit, a lot of these are places that I shop at with some frequency, sometimes only occasionally. But the fact of the matter is, I really don't want my inbox cluttered with stuff what I want is when I have something that I want to purchase, I want to have the best deal that you are going to offer to me at the moment when I actually am interested in buying something.
Right. Right. So
And
now,
valuable.
but here's a key distinction, right? I hate the definition, the distinction between B2B and B2C. But you say sales, marketing, and service, and immediately my mind shifted to CRM, traditional B2B relationship management, right? But then you shifted to commerce and consumers, and then my mind shifted to like direct to consumer and business to customer, right? I hate the
Yep.
definition, but there's really, in a CRM type relationship, in a business to business relationship, one business, usually the vendor, has a bigger power than the other one. I believe in a business to consumer, direct to consumer, the consumer has the biggest power, right? And that actually changes. Sorry, let me finish. See, you need to learn this. I'll send you my therapist number. She's doing really good work with me. But this is where, like, this is really, I think, the distinction that is worth taking away from this article is like in real time. There's no real time for business to business for the most part. I mean, let's be honest. But for business to consumer, direct to consumer, yes. So, anyways, I'll let you talk now.
No, I disagree to some extent because I think there is, and I think actually business to business buyers do have a significant amount of control. It's really a question of how those communications happen and what the signals are, right? So, I mean, the classic thing is, and CRM is a great kind of tee up for this. I want to get this deal closed as a salesperson by the end of the month or the end of the quarter because I get an incentive for that, and my sales manager is breathing down the back of my neck for me to get this deal closed. Oftentimes what happens in more sophisticated relationships between the buyer and the seller is that the salesperson will say, hey, look, it would be really great if we can sign this deal before the end of the month. And there's usually some sort of conversation about what would sweeten the deal, what the quid pro quo is. In the consumer side, it may well be, hey, we've got this fire sale on because we have all of this stock that we need to get rid of, in the warehouse or whatever it might be. So there are differences, certainly, and the context and the type of communication is a bit different, but I still think you do have some of that interaction. Now, is it real time in business to business? To some extent, it is, because it's partly about being there for the conversation at the right time for the customer.
So then the conversations happen in real time, but the actions don't necessarily will happen in real time, right?
No.
So I've been playing a lot with dynamic journeys lately, and one of the guys here at SAP who came from the Marsis, Raj, will not even try to say his last name, but he knows who he is. Respect. He very smart guy. He actually has this classification of things that starts, with event action decision, event decision action, right? For any interaction. So what you're saying is that there's no event decision action in conversations. It just helps move things forward. There may be insights coming in out of that, and this is me learning as I say this, right? There may be insights that come out of the conversation, but there's no decision, there's no action that actually comes from that, even though the event is there. So it's just you're more focused on the event and the decision making than the action itself. Whereas in an interaction that has an outcome, you may not be so focused on the event, a little bit more on the decision, but it really focused on the action and what comes out of that. Did I say that right, or did it make sense?
I think it makes sense. And I think, again, this is back to the customers deciding, right? So as the seller, as the business, whether you're dealing with consumers or other business buyers, you may have a desired timeline. You want to clear out the stock that you have in your warehouse, or you want to close the deals in time to get your commission kicker. But you ultimately are not responsible for actually making that purchase. You can tee up the things that might help to accelerate it, but you're not in the driver's seat on it.
So we go back to the value co-creation concept, right?
Yeah.
Both are going to get value, but you need to do it a little bit at a time, and they both need to contribute towards the end. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I come to some of my beef with marketing campaigns and the fact that campaigns are still this really kind of antiquated mentality. It's about how can I drive some big push? I'm going to have some massive communication. And I find it interesting that a lot of the discussion is still talking about how to personalize that, because it's fundamentally not personal. It's fundamentally not driven by what's happening with individual customers, because it's an attempt to push something out to customers that might or might not be relevant to them. I'm being a little bit unfair. I think that there is an increasing degree of sophistication around this. I mean, let's take in the B2C space, people that haven't bought from you for a while. I mean, maybe what you want to do is make your business top of mind for them, and you have a good way of segmenting customers that haven't bought from you recently based on something you know about them, that gives you an excuse to say something. But again, there's an inherent kind of value exchange there, because you're not just trying to push a message to them, you're really trying to find a good excuse to communicate with them. And I think any B2B seller will totally understand that kind of construct, because you never want to just randomly call someone up and say, hey, how's it going? You want to have the reason to communicate with them, and that reason has to have some importance for the recipient.
If you were with somebody's show called I Know What I'm Doing, we would go into a tangent on personalization. But since I don't know what I'm doing, we're gonna leave that for next time. But let me finish this part because I want to keep it to like a tight 20. Let me finish this with a simple question. The concept of the article was about real-time interaction management. We talk a little bit about time back and forth in my statement on B2B, B2C being different, whatever. Does real time really matter in this case in interactions? Does real time really make a difference? Or I mean, sure, some had to be resolved right away, but like going back to your concept, and this, okay, so this is a complicated question. Let me back it up and make it a better question. Thinking in terms of real time, thinking in terms of interaction, and thinking in terms of conversation, like I was just defining the difference between a conversation that may have no action and an interaction that may have no event that pushing it, right? So real-time interaction, conversation, how does all this stuff play together? Where does it really matter?
I think it really matters to a large extent, and this was covered in the article, and I thought this stuff was very good as like a sanity check on whether you're going to do something. So again, that's outbound, that's an action that you as the business are taking. Real time, are you going to stop yourself from doing something stupid? Are you going to stop yourself from promoting something that the customer has just complained about? Are you going to stop from sending some communication that is totally out of touch with whatever the latest conversation is, or what you know about the customer's context? So I think in that sense, it is very important. I think there's a positive side to that too. And that's very much actually part of this whole journey design idea or journey orchestration, which is thinking through what's happening on the customer side in certain scenarios, because there are absolutely times when you want to have some sort of resolution follow-up that is more positive, that is again about, depending on what the context of the conversation is, actually demonstrating that you heard and understood what that last interaction was all about. And whether it's resolving it or reinforcing it or it's simply acknowledging it, sometimes that is the right thing to do, quote unquote, in real time or in the appropriate time, which might be soon thereafter as well.
So wrapping this up, what am I missing? I mean, I haven't say 80% agreement with what you're saying. It helped me refine a couple concepts and ideas. But what am I missing here? What was in the article? Or what was in your head that we haven't expressed, and what am I missing?
I think the big question this article left me with is, do you really need all these tools if you've set the right framework in the first place for understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are for your relationships with your customers, what your customers' goals are for their relationship with you, and what are the key elements to making those objectives happen?
You're so close. If you would have said what's the actual outcome, I would have agreed with you 100%. But absolutely 1000% understand the customer expectations, understand your goals, understand the outcome that you're seeking and enjoying to co-create value. That's what its interactions is all about. So with that, let me finish this first edition of I Don't Know What I'm Doing with guest, with my very special guest, Nicole France. Nicole, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Esteban. And I'm going to rename it, not Comedians Not in Cars Not Getting Coffee.
Let's go to comedians in enterprise tech talking BS.
We may be clowns, but we're not comedians, Esteban.
There you go. Now we're talking. So thank you very much for listening one more time, and until the next time.